She was a dream made flesh. The kind of blonde Hollywood sculpted in its most feverish fantasies: flawless skin, crimson lips, a laugh that made producers lean forward. She shimmered on magazine covers, kissed the biggest stars, and made headlines just by walking into a room. But fairy tales don't end with mugshots. Not unless they're written in Hollywood ink. Behind the soft focus and champagne smiles was a woman unraveling. One night, she was the star of Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye. A few years later, she was selling herself for the price of a pack of cigarettes, drifting from jail cells to flop houses, her name long erased from marquees. She didn't fall from grace. She was shoved, chewed up, and forgotten. And no one asked why. This is the untold story of Barbara Payton. Before the downfall, before the scandals, there was only the shimmer. Barbara Lee Payton stormed into Hollywood like a beautiful accident waiting to happen. Born in Cloquet, Minnesota in 1927. She was the all-American fantasy, carved from ice and fire, a blonde bombshell with the eyes of a sinner and the smile of a saint. From the moment she arrived in Los Angeles, cameras turned toward her like sunflowers to light. She wasn't just another pretty face. She was the face. The Hollywood press devoured her. They called her the atomic blonde. The next big thing, the blonde with bite. Photographers followed her every step, whether she was draped in a white fur coat at a movie premiere or lounging poolside in a swimsuit that hugged every curve like it had been designed by sin itself. Barbara Payton was cinema's new seduction, and the industry wanted her on every screen, in every fantasy. Her breakout came in 1950's Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, opposite the legendary James Cagney. She wasn't just holding her own, she was magnetic. Her performance as the femme fatale Carlotta shone with an intensity that both alarmed and entranced. She wasn't playing dangerous. She was dangerous. That was the allure. Barbara wasn't content with just being pretty. She radiated confidence, even arrogance. On set, she could be charming, flirtatious, or combative, depending on her mood. Studio executives loved her fire, until it burned too hot to control. She wasn't groomed in the quiet discipline of actresses like Grace Kelly. She was raw, unfiltered, and fiercely independent. That made her irresistible, and impossible to manage. And then there were the men. Hollywood's most powerful and most troubled men chased her like moths to flame. She was linked to Bob Hope, Howard Hughes, Gregory Peck, Guy Madison. The list read like a casting call for a war film. But it was two particular names that would define her downfall: actor Tom Neal and Franket Tone. The public couldn't get enough. Barbara was always on the front page, not for her films, but for her affairs, her fights, her choices. She posed for Life magazine in 1951. Her blonde hair cascading across her shoulders, her gaze piercing the lens like it owed her something. To America, she was the girl who had it all, and then some. Yet beneath all the glitter, something trembled. Those who knew her closely described her as unpredictable, volatile, even self-destructive. But the cameras didn't care. They saw the lipstick, the curves, the champagne glass raised in flirtation. Hollywood doesn't look behind the smile. It sells the smile. Barbara Payton became a symbol of everything men wanted and everything women were warned not to become. She played roles in film noirs, westerns, and melodramas, movies with titles like Only the Valiant, Bride of the Gorilla, Dallas, and Four-Sided Triangle. She was never the leading lady for long, but when she was on screen, you watched her. She didn't just play characters, she bled into them. Every role was a prelude to the chaos of her real life. But Hollywood, like any lover, grows bored. By the mid-1950s, the offers slowed. The headlines turned cruel. The industry that once called her a walking flame began whispering words like liability, unstable, overexposed. Yet in the eyes of the public, Barbara Payton was still the girl who had conquered Tinseltown. Still the woman who defied expectations with a wink and a cigarette. Still the blonde on the posters, lips slightly parted. Danger in her gaze. They didn't know she was already falling. Before the lipstick. Before the laughter. Before the scandal. There was Barbara Lee Redfield, a girl raised on cold winds and colder silences in Cloquet, Minnesota. Her father, Erwin, was a Norwegian construction worker with a temper like dynamite, quick to ignite, impossible to control. Her mother, Mabel, an Irish Catholic with rigid beliefs, sought salvation through control. Rules, obedience, and appearances. Love, in that household, was earned, not given. Barbara learned early how to use her looks. Not for vanity, but survival. When her father drank, she smiled. When her mother raged, she performed. A pretty face became her shield, her currency, her escape. At the age of 11, her family moved to Odessa, Texas, chasing opportunity, running from something. Maybe both. In Texas, Barbara bloomed. She became the girl boys whispered about in school hallways and girls eyed with envy. Teachers noted her beauty before her intelligence. But behind the lip gloss and cat eyes, Barbara carried bruises you couldn't see. By 16, she was married, to her high school sweetheart John Lee Payton. They had a child, a boy named John Jr. But motherhood wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined. Neither was marriage. It suffocated her. Chained her to a reality she had no intention of living. Less than a year later, she left both husband and child behind, chasing something glossier, something loud, something called Hollywood. Few talk about this part. Few ask what kind of pain makes a mother leave her baby. But Barbara wasn't cruel. She was desperate. Hollywood didn't come easy. She posed for cheesecake pinups, attended endless casting calls, and tolerated hands that wandered. Men made promises they never kept. Studios flirted, but never committed. For a time, she was nothing more than a pretty accessory to more powerful men. And in the margins of the studio lots, Barbara discovered her two most loyal companions, alcohol and chaos. She drank to feel brave. She drank to feel numb. Sometimes, she drank just to feel anything at all. Beneath the bravado, Barbara was fragile. A woman always afraid the mirror might crack. That her beauty, the one thing she could rely on, might fade, and with it, her worth. Friends recall her breaking down in dressing rooms. Slurring her lines. Showing up late, bruised, or not at all. She laughed too loudly, flirted too hard, burned too bright. And yet no one stopped her. Because Barbara Payton still looked good on camera. In 1951, the cracks widened. She became entangled in a love triangle that would define her undoing. Tom Neal and Franket Tone, two actors, one a violent ex-boxer, the other a refined former matinee idol. Barbara oscillated between them, fueling a tabloid frenzy. But what no one knew, what even she may not have fully realized, was that she had already begun her descent. That year, Tom Neal beat Franket Tone so savagely he fractured his skull and left him in a coma. Barbara claimed she was trying to help Tone. Others whispered she instigated the fight. The press had a field day. The studios backed away. Public sympathy turned to scorn. Barbara was no longer just reckless. She was radioactive. By then, her reputation was in tatters. Studios labeled her a liability. Directors hesitated. Offers dried up. But the damage wasn't only external, it was inside her, eating away like rust beneath paint. The glamour was a mask. The drinking wasn't just a habit, it was a coping mechanism. And her relationships weren't just love, they were war zones. She once confided to a friend, "People think I want attention. What I want is to be held without being hurt. But vulnerability didn't sell tickets. So Barbara smiled, posed, and drowned in silence. What the world saw was a blonde bombshell spiraling. What they didn't see was a little girl, still waiting for someone to tell her she was enough, without makeup, without headlines, without a man. Barbara Payton's past wasn't just hidden. It was buried. Under foundation. Under bravado. Under a name she chose because her real one hurt too much to keep. Barbara didn't rise. She was sculpted. Not by grace. But by desperation. By studios. By men. By the myths Hollywood needed to survive. She changed her name. Barbara Payton sounded stronger, sharper. She bleached her hair until it glowed under studio lights. She learned how to walk like a siren, how to laugh like she wasn't afraid, how to smoke like every exhale was a secret. She knew her angles better than her lines. In a town built on illusion, Barbara Payton became an expert illusionist. Her transformation wasn't subtle. It was electric. In 1949, she signed a contract with Universal Studios. For a while, she was the girl. She lit up the screen with a hunger that didn't come from acting school, it came from survival. There was always a hint of danger behind her beauty, like kissing her might get you burned. And that's exactly what Hollywood wanted. But beneath the lipstick and mink stoles, Barbara was spiraling into a carefully constructed trap. The studio system that had plucked her from obscurity now demanded everything, her time, her image, her silence. Behind the scenes, she was drinking more. Showing up to auditions late. Getting too friendly with married producers. She wasn't following the rules. Worse, she didn't care. In an industry built on discipline, Barbara played her own game. And then came the men. Not just suitors, patrons. Brokers of power. She didn't fall in love. She fell into contracts with consequences. Howard Hughes, the elusive billionaire, sent her diamonds wrapped in newspaper. Bob Hope kept her in the shadows, even while giving her lavish gifts. Gregory Peck shared whispered nights and denied everything in daylight. Every man saw her as something different, a fantasy, a secret, a prize. None saw her as a person. But it was Tom Neal who pulled her into the abyss. He wasn't just dangerous, he was chaos incarnate. A boxer turned actor, with fists faster than his temper. Their relationship was an endless loop of passion and destruction, fights in public, reconciliations in hotel rooms, bruises covered with powder. When she tried to break free, he pulled her deeper. Then came Franket Tone. Older. Sophisticated. Everything Tom Neal wasn't. Barbara saw him as a lifeline out of the madness. But the triangle she formed became a war zone. When Tom beat Tone into a coma outside her apartment in 1951, Barbara's name was splashed across headlines, not as a starlet, but as scandal. It was the beginning of the end. Universal dropped her. Directors refused to cast her. Even her agents disappeared. But Barbara refused to retreat. She kept showing up, at parties, at premieres, in tabloid photos with smeared mascara and a forced smile. She tried to reinvent again, not as the Golden Girl, but as the defiant outsider. She posed for pulp magazines. Took roles in low-budget horror flicks. Even published a tell-all autobiography called I Am Not Ashamed. But the truth was, she was. By the mid-1950s, she was no longer acting. She was surviving. She took menial jobs. Modeled for scandal rags. Rumors swirled she was working as a call girl, and not just rumors, police reports confirmed it. Still, she clung to the myth. Told friends she had a big role coming. Claimed a comeback was near. Hollywood loves a redemption arc, she believed. But she didn't understand, in their eyes, her script was already finished. Barbara Payton didn't fade. She was erased. One scandal at a time. One drink at a time. Until all that remained was a woman who had once been a star, now playing a role no one wanted to watch. She tried to rewrite her narrative. But the pen had been taken from her hand long ago. She once said, "I was a victim of every man's fantasy. But not one man's love." And perhaps that was the truest line she ever delivered. For a brief, dazzling moment, she had it all. Barbara Payton stood at the edge of true stardom, camera flashes like lightning bolts, red carpets beneath her stilettos. Men offering roses and studios offering millions. In 1950, her performance in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye opposite James Cagney marked the beginning of what should have been a legendary career. She was sultry, sharp, dangerous, the perfect femme fatale for a post-war America that craved thrill and beauty in equal measure. Audiences couldn't look away. Critics took note. The studio called her a natural. But no one warned her, Hollywood doesn't crown queens. It borrows them. By 1951, she was making $10,000 a week, a staggering sum at the time. She drove a white Cadillac convertible, smoked only the most expensive cigarettes, drank champagne for breakfast. Barbara Payton had climbed the golden ladder. And every rung was polished with attention, lust, and envy. But the top of the ladder wasn't heaven. It was a ledge. The higher she rose, the more unstable she became. Her relationship with Tom Neal had evolved from tabloid fodder to public horror. Friends described late-night calls from Barbara, weeping, slurring, begging for someone to come get her. But when they arrived, she'd already gone back to Tom, her face bruised, her excuses rehearsed. Her engagement to Franket Tone, the polished actor with a pedigreed career, was meant to be her salvation. But it ended in violence. When Tom Neal beat Tone into unconsciousness in front of Barbara's apartment, the story made front pages nationwide. Tone was hospitalized with a smashed cheekbone, broken nose, and brain concussion. Barbara visited him at the hospital. Then returned to Tom Neal the next night. It was unforgivable. Hollywood, a place built on illusions of romance and redemption, could tolerate many sins. But not this. Producers dropped her. Public sympathy curdled into contempt. Scripts stopped arriving. Directors stopped calling. Her name, once synonymous with sultry allure, became shorthand for scandal. By 1953, she was taking roles in Z-grade films, forgotten titles with paper-thin plots and bargain-bin budgets. Bride of the Gorilla, Four-Sided Triangle, Bad Blonde. Movies that barely made it to drive-ins. Let alone cinemas. She wasn't acting anymore. She was clinging. Then came the drugs. Barbara, already drinking heavily, began mixing barbiturates into the cocktail. Her nights became blackouts. Her mornings began on someone else's couch, or jail floor. The police knew her by name. The tabloids stopped glamorizing. They started mocking. One morning in 1955, she was found unconscious in a gutter in West Hollywood, still in an evening gown, mascara streaked down her cheeks. The press ran the photo. No caption was needed. She had become the cautionary tale. Her once immaculate face began to bloat. Her skin dulled. She aged faster than time allowed. By her early 30s, she looked 45. A decade of bad men, bad liquor, and bad luck had rewritten her features. Still, she refused to admit defeat. In 1963, Barbara published an autobiography, I Am Not Ashamed. It was raw, brutal, unapologetic. She detailed the abuse, the affairs, the addiction. She called out the industry, the men, the lies. Some said it was a last gasp for relevance. Others saw it as the first time she'd ever truly spoken with her own voice. But it came too late. That same year, she was arrested for passing bad checks. She was living in motels. Sometimes in her car. She told strangers she was working on a film. There was no film. Only fading. Barbara Payton's peak was brilliant, but brief. And the price? Everything. She lost custody of her son. She lost her home. She lost her reputation. She lost her identity. Hollywood didn't kill her. It simply stepped aside and let her drown. In a rare interview, Barbara once whispered, "I wasn't made for this world. I was made for some dream that died before I got there." And maybe that's all fame really is, a dream that dies differently for each of its believers. Barbara Payton didn't die in a blaze of glory. She died in a dirty apartment in San Diego, with a swollen liver, failing heart, and no one left to lie to. It was May 8, 1967. She was 39 years old, but looked decades older. Her body had become a battlefield of addiction, loneliness, and regret. The autopsy listed heart and liver failure. But the truth was simpler. She died of everything. In her final years, Barbara was unrecognizable. She wandered the streets in torn clothes, trading her name for a motel bed, a drink, a moment of warmth. Those who saw her said her eyes still carried a flicker of the past, but the rest was gone. There was no funeral attended by Hollywood's elite. No grand memorial. Just a quiet cremation and a box of ashes. Yet in her ruin, Barbara left something behind. A cautionary tale too haunting to forget. Her autobiography, I Am Not Ashamed, still circulates in cult corners of film history, read by those drawn to tragedy or perhaps warning. Barbara Payton became more than a fallen star. She became a ghost of what Hollywood doesn't talk about. The price of being desired, devoured, and discarded. She didn't vanish. She became a whisper. A caution etched in gold dust and broken glass.